And I think we're going to kick off talking about Doctor Who. Do we have any Doctor Who fans in the audience today? Well, that's a big surprise. If we didn't, I would be saying, what the hell are you doing here? So it's very nice to have you. Welcome. I'd like to start off by going down this line of lovely people and just finding out their earliest memory of Doctor Who. So I think that may have a little effect on how they perceive it and how they've gone on to write for it. So, Mary, your first Doctor Who memory?
My first Doctor Who memory actually is of seeing the Daleks, and I think it was a Patrick Troughton episode, and running behind the sofa because I was so terrified. And I still was kind of poking my head out because I still wanted to see it, but I found them really, really frightening, and they weren't just the usual kind of somebody dressed up in a rubber suit with 2 arms and 2 legs, and that's what made them really work, I think. But that is my earliest memory of Doctor Who.
So you literally were behind the sofa?
I was indeed.
It worked, fantastic. Patrick, how about you?
There was a really amazing Chewbacca cosplay at the back. Yeah, really something.
Oh my god, there is a
So my first Doctor Who memory, 2005.
So
I'm American, honestly.
So you came to the new series when had you heard anything about Doctor Who?
Christopher Eccleston, I'd heard of Doctor Who. I'd heard the KLF song.
Doctor Who.
I just watched the first series of Christopher Eccleston.
And what did you think?
So there, I'm not ashamed.
And what did you think though when you saw it?
I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
It's all right.
It was alright, yeah.
I'm kidding.
Charlie, how about you? What was your first memory of Doctor Who?
Well, as possibly the oldest person on here, I remember watching William Hartnell. I remember the very first Doctor. I don't remember much of it. I remember being quite sort of weird and black and white.
Did you sort of watch it periodically, or was it?
Yeah, no, I carried on through Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee, but my favourite Doctor was Tom Baker. He was, for me, he was the Doctor. I've loved all of them. And when I came to make a series called Radlin Hopkirk Deceased in 2000, and we needed a character in that who was he was basically God. And we were really lucky we managed to get Tom Baker to do it, and it was fantastic fun working with him on 2 series of Radlin Hopkirk.
He is the closest thing to God. He was my Doctor Who as well, I think, Tom Baker. My first memory was Sarah Jane Smith stuck in a ventilator shaft in the Ark in Space in 1975. Not that, I remember these things very well or anything like that. Marcus, how about yourself?
I'm going to mention Tom Baker too, because I think they're all roughly the same year, but it was the regeneration actually. I remember being transfixed to the TV as Tom Baker, then later became Peter Davison. And the other memory is those really, the early the Peter Cushing one, yeah. That was on Saturday morning sometime. I can't remember how old I was, but I loved that.
Yeah, that was like some weird, not quite Doctor Who thing, but they had quite an effect on my childhood, I think, because that was shown quite a lot more often than the actual show was, it seems, in those days. How about you, Andy? What about you?
Can everybody hear me at the back okay, by the way? Hands up at the back if you can hear me. Yeah, we're okay. I was born in 1963, about 6 months before the first episode of Doctor Who, so in theory I could have seen the whole thing. But my memory of the early ones is a little bit fuzzy. My earliest memory is The Wheel in Space, the Patrick Troughton story from 1968. But I watched a lot of them in black and white, because even the John Pertwee's, because my parents had a black and white TV. The first one I saw in colour was Carnival of Monsters, which bizarrely had aliens who were grey-skinned. So it was like, what was the point of that?
It was an anti-climax, wasn't it, after all? So Doctor Who ran on TV for, it was 26 years, wasn't it? It finished in 1989. And around that time, it started to take off in print, with Virgin Books doing the New Adventures. And Andy, you were one of the early writers of those books, and you actually brought Sherlock Holmes into Doctor Who, didn't you?
I did. I'd always wanted to write a Sherlock Holmes book ever since I was, yay tall. So the first book I ever bought with my own pocket money was a Doctor Who, a Sherlock Holmes novel, it was A Study in Scarlet. And the second book, which is about 15 seconds later, was a cheap American 1950s pulp paperback. So Doctor Who and cheap science fiction and Sherlock Holmes have always been together in my mind. But yeah, I managed to sneak Sherlock Holmes into Doctor Who, but it's the question, was he a real character or is he a fictional character? Crossing universes is a very odd thing to do.
So you kind of squeezed it together, didn't you? I mean, I imagine growing up you probably read quite a lot of fan fiction about Doctor Who.
I wrote massive amounts of fan fiction about Doctor. That's what trained me to write.
Hmm.
And of course, the early stories I wrote were all adventures with Daleks and Cybermen and Sontarans all together in the same room fighting each other. But then by the 25th fan story I wrote, it was more about the Doctor alone on the edge of a cliff, thinking about his life. And you develop characterisation and style as you're going along. But the great thing about Virgin Books, when they got the licence to do the spin-off Doctor Who novels, rather than getting established known authors in and teaching them about Doctor Who, they did the opposite. They got in Doctor Who fans and taught us how to write. And I will always bless Virgin for making that commercial decision.
And good to see it was. Thinking about things you were writing when you were younger, Mallory, did you write about the things that were on TV, or was it always things you made up? Were you influenced by what you watched when you wrote?
I mean, everything I watched had an influence on my writing, but I must admit I kind of made up my own characters. I loved playing what-if games and making up conversations, and if an alien came down, what would I say and what would they ask me and so on. So for me, they were always made up, but everything feeds into your imagination. And I remember like Margaret's Saturday morning pictures and seeing Doctor Who there, and I remember the cheer that always went up when it was Peter Cushing's Doctor Who. So they had a massive, massive impact on me. And again, they were both Dalek films. So I must admit my favourite villains in Doctor Who are the Daleks. But I just think it all feeds in. So for me, it was about all the things I watched, all the things I read that I loved, inspiring my writing, but I wanted to make up my own things. But when I had the chance to write a Doctor Who story, of course I snatched their hands off, so I wasn't going to say no to that.
So Patrick, what was it that made you want to write? What was it? Was it anything to do with what you saw on TV and films or characters that you particularly loved, or?
Well, it was any writers here? Anybody want to be a writer? Any budding writers? Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's a good enthusiastic handism too. I approve of that. For me, it was a private thing, and I thought I can make my own little world. I don't know. You know how people always ask writers what character in fiction they are, and everyone goes, Elizabeth Bennet. And that's a lie. That's a total lie. You know how in The Cat in the Hat, and there's Thing 1 and Thing 2, and there are two kids who are trying to clean up the mess that the Cat in the Hat is making? Authors are those kids. We are trying to clean up a chaotic world and make sense of it. And so that's what I was doing. And then to my real astonishment, people responded how I wanted them to. If I was writing an exciting something, they'd find it exciting. If I was writing something funny, they'd laugh, and that's amazing. I mean, that's an incredible reaction and unexpected.
How about yourself, Marcus?
I think one of the things I always like to say, if you're thinking about being a writer, is that I feel that tyranny. I don't know you guys, but that tyranny of people said, yes, I was 6 years old and I knew I wanted to be a writer. I was 26 years old before I even began to think about doing it. So I didn't really write an awful lot when I was young. The first thing I ever had published, I was 14 years old, and it was a short horror story. You may be unsurprised to learn. You may be more surprised to learn that it was actually a story that my mother had told me. My mother was a nurse, and nursing is one of those jobs where on the first day as a nurse they tell the new girl some really disgusting, freaky story. And I just took that story, rewrote it slightly, and I won this competition. So that tells you more about my mother than it does about me.
Charlie, how about you? When did you first think you could be writing stuff? I know you've been many things in your career.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is if you have a panel of writers up here and you ask them any question about writing, you'll get as many different answers as there are writers, and everybody comes to it differently and approaches it differently. I'd say if I was anything in the Cat in the Hat, I'd be the Cat in the Hat. I'd be the one making the mess, coming up with the stuff and throwing it out there. And I did start writing when I was about 8 years old. I used to write because I loved writing. I loved making stuff up. I loved creating characters that had never existed before, telling stories that had never existed before. And it was so easy. It was the cheapest, easiest way to be creative. You need a pen and a piece of paper, and you can create the whole universe. And I did it for my own pleasure. Through my teenage years, I started writing fantasy. Then I moved into science fiction. Then I went to university and started writing unreadable, arty student nonsense. And then somebody turned me on to crime writing, and I wrote some crime books in the early 90s, and that was my first published fiction, although, as you say, I had a parallel career writing for television.
You can create universes, and of course you can destroy them as well with Doctor Who, which is a fabulous thing I always liked about it. I was always blowing up universes and escaping into different ones at the last second. But when I came to Doctor Who fiction professionally, I was as the editor of the BBC Doctor Who books when the BBC took back the licence from Virgin in the wake of the TV movie in 1996 with Paul McGann, who's here today, very exciting. And back then, it was very hard actually to find people from other genres and other places or established writers to write for it. No one really felt very much about Doctor Who back then. I was the only person working in Doctor Who, and it was something like 22 80,000 word novels a year we were commissioning and editing and doing, and non-fiction and audio stuff on top of that. If I went off to the gents, nothing was happening in the world of Doctor Who, and I always thought if I died at my desk, maybe no one would notice for weeks. Eventually they might say, shouldn't we have had another 5 Doctor Who books out by now? But I remember I approached Neil Gaiman to write one for me back then. It was just after we'd done Neverwhere. And he was very sweet about it and said, well, that'd be fun, but I'm not quite sure you can afford me. And then he explained that how much he'd got for Neverwhere, which he'd done as a favour because they were doing the TV, and I had to say, you're right, we can't quite afford you for that. But it was, I suppose the whole attitude to science fiction has kind of changed and gone through a bit of a renaissance. I mean, Charlie, you mentioned Randall and Hopkirk. Well, that's in a time where the BBC's commissioning actually ran very safe. Was there a resistance to pushing through a very full-on fantasy show like Randall and Hopkirk? I mean, it's basically about 2 detectives, one of whom dies but comes back as a ghost to help the other. And Vic and Bob was starring, you were producing. How did that go?
Not very well. Because, as you say, at the time, people didn't really get it. They weren't ready for full-on fantasy. I wrote it as a homage to the fantastic shows of the 1960s that I grew up on, one of which was the original Randall and Hopkirk. There were brilliant series then which had strong levels of fantasy, things like The Avengers and The Prisoner and hundreds of others. And I wanted to try and bring that type of TV back, because TV had basically all become kitchen sink drama and soap operas, and things were judged on how realistic they were. And so, we bring out Randall and Hopkirk where one character's a ghost. Of course it's not going to be realistic.
But Tom Baker in there? Of course it's not going to be good.
So people were a bit bemused by it. And I was really pleased actually when Russell T Davies brought Doctor Who back, and he managed to pull it off. He got it right, he got the balance right of there was enough science fiction, there was enough fantasy, but there was also a strong grounding in drama and character with the Doctor and with Rose. And people bought into it, and I was really pleased because he used actually quite a lot of the people that I'd had working on Randall and Hopkirk.
Yeah.
He used
Gareth Roberts.
Mark Gatiss, obviously, who had also written some of the
books with him,
books with you, and also Murray Gold did the music for us.
Oh, of course, yes.
Steve, can we just throw something in here?
Of course.
A friend of mine, his wife runs an Indian dance troupe in England. They go around to various festivals and do Indian Diwali dance. And he was showing his wife Charlie's Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, and she said, this would work brilliantly as a Bollywood musical. And I can kind of see how that would work.
Reinterpreting one of things in different ways. I'm loving it. That's a fantastic thing. I'd like to talk a little bit about the stories in this fantastic book. Anyone got this book? Seen it? Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it? I'd like to go to Marcus. I'm surprised you said that Tom Baker was your Doctor in a way, because your story, The Spear of Destiny, for the Third Doctor and Joey, it felt very much like almost like a love letter to that era. It was very, very evocative of the Pertwee time.
I'm just old enough to remember John Pertwee too, and I love John Pertwee. And he was like, I have said before, he was like that schoolmaster that you're terrified of, and yet you kind of love him too. Strict at times, but then very warm and human at other times. So I was delighted to get to write about John Pertwee. Fantastic. So I think often we do write love letters as our novels, don't we? To people we know, or to parts of ourselves, or to who we were 20 years ago, or novels are very often love letters. It's a good way of putting it.
I was amused by your poking fun at John Pertwee's collars and Inverness came throughout it as well.
You could not mention the fashion of John Pertwee.
Which is the great thing, because of course, writing from a later vantage point, you can actually contextualise what was happening currently in the past. Also, it's a nice way. Quite often, you have characters saying, "Well, this is 1973, so I can break into this museum quite easily because there's none of the technology that we know about from a later date."
Yeah, and the question is how you do these things subtly enough, isn't it? Without going, just like, here, I'll show you how much I know about 1973. You've got to do it in a more subtle way than that. But equally, it is helpful for the modern reader to do some of that stuff. So there's always a fine balancing act to be found with that.
Interesting. So Patrick, can you tell me how you, as you hadn't presumably seen the old series, or not very much of it, how did you come to be writing for the Fifth Doctor, the Peter Davison?
They asked.
So they gave you
I
the
said,
Doctor.
sure, what the hell? They gave me a choice of 2 doctors, and I said, oh, no, I'll take the 5th Doctor. And,
Go on, can you tell us?
I'm not going to say. So they sent a ton of DVDs, so I watched the show a bit. I'd actually seen Peter Davison in a touring production of Noises Off in Bromley, and I said in my little film for I thought, this, of all the Doctors, this is the one who most likely to be a novelist. This is the one who stands at the side and watches and observes and acts, and I really wanted this nice sort of feel. I like the stories of Doctor Who where the Doctor isn't the center, where somebody else is, and the Doctor's on the periphery, and you can really see again how alien the Doctor is. The Doctor's an alien, and it's nice to be. I think it's nice to be reminded once in a while that different hearts beat, and how he looks to American kids in 1945.
And yours had a real YA kind of feel in terms of the setting and the characters or teams, and the idea of creatures that can only tell the truth, and to the negative effects that that can have. Well, that is, there's some clever stuff going on in that.
Thanks. Well, I mean, it's puffing on the spine. I thought, this is a YA collection, and I am in no way embarrassed or ashamed to be very, very proud to write YA. And but I thought, okay, what would I wanted to read when I was 13 and somebody gave me a Doctor Who collection? And I thought I would have wanted to see the Doctor through my own eyes, and I would have wanted to. I'm a writer from James Dawson who always talks about the secret of Doctor Who is that you are not the Doctor, you are the companion. And I thought that makes a lot of sense to me. You are the one who comes along with the Doctor, and that's why it's so welcoming. So I thought, let's have a look from the outside, how the Doctor might feel. These 2 kids figuring themselves out with this weird alien thing.
Now, Mallory, I have one thing to say to you, Mallory, and that thing is, I'm reconfiguring the chronodynamic tensor to have a non-orthogonal phase angle. Your words, Mallory Blackman, your words! Now,
Well, you know what? I am such a gadget freak. I love my gadgets. I love my technology. I used to be a computer programmer for 10 years, so
so that's all real, is it?
So I'm not wrong. That's not wrong.
You kind of had to write for the 7th Doctor by default back in the 90s when Virgin were taking over. But there was very much an attempt to make the Doctor much darker in terms of reimagining the TV show as with stories too broad and deep for the small screen. Was that kind of the remit? It was basically to take those stories into a far more adult dimension, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And to an extent, sex and swearing could be done in those 7th Doctor New Adventures. We were allowed to go off into all kinds of surreal territories and different ways of telling stories, which was quite adventurous because Virgin could have played it safe and just let us do things like the Doctor Who annuals that came out. But they didn't. They actually took some risks. Actually, can I pick up on something that a couple of people have talked about? Of course. And that's the idea of, it may just be me, but I found sometimes writing for the Doctor, especially the first Doctor, you can tend to pick up on the idiosyncrasies rather than the character. You end up kind of almost pastiching the character. I think that something was, you talked earlier about John Pertwee's commas. There was always that possibility that you pick up on those different quirks that the actor puts in, and you're not writing necessarily for the Doctor himself. I've got to be very careful about that. And same is true of Sherlock Holmes. You can pastiche Sherlock Holmes very, very easily.
In a way, you did with All Consuming Fire, the Virgin book, in a way, because you're presenting a lot of the Sherlock tropes to a different audience.
I was actually what I tried to do with Sherlock Holmes and All Consuming Fire was to gradually take him further and further out of his comfort zone. So the first half of the book is set in Victorian London, which he understands, and then the next quarter is set in, I think it was Africa, where he's a little bit out of his depth.
Sherlock Holmes in Africa.
And then the last, that was India, sorry, it was a long time ago. And then the last quarter was set on an alien planet, where he's got no frame of reference. He cannot make any deductions because he does not understand the way the thing works.
Who's in space? It's a pretty impressive thing. And so, Charlie, you came to do. Did you get a choice with the Ninth Doctor, the Ecclestone version, or was it a sign?
There had been some discussions early on, but I had been very busy working on something else, so I couldn't take up my first choice because of the way the schedule worked. But I got a very important one. I got to do Christopher Eccleston, and I think after William Hartnell, that incarnation of the Doctor was the most important because if that hadn't been popular, if they hadn't got that right, we wouldn't all be sitting here today. The Doctor Who would have been killed off forever, and I don't think anyone would have ever tried to bring him back. So it was a really, really important time. And Christopher's been sort of slightly forgotten. Because he only did the one series, he's been sort of eclipsed by David Tennant. But as I say, it was a really important time. So I was very pleased to do that one. And I wanted to write about the companion, because as Patrick was saying, the companion is our way in, that's the important side of the Doctor. And I sort of assumed that everyone else would write quite a lot about Rose. As it turned out, I don't think anyone did. So I wanted to look at why the Doctor chose Rose. So it was almost about, I suppose, trying to get inside almost the mindset of Russell Davies and how he created the character of Rose. And there's a bit at the end of the very first episode with Christopher Eccleston where he says to Rose, "Come with me, we'll have a fantastic time," and she says no. The TARDIS takes off, disappears. He comes back about 30 seconds later and he says, "By the way, did I tell you we can also travel through time?" And she goes running off and she goes with him. So my story, I thought, in that 30 seconds, it was 30 seconds to Rose, but the Doctor could have gone off for 1,000 years and he could have gone off all around the universe because he could travel through space and time. So I set my story in that 30 seconds where he goes off to somewhere else and he finds what he thinks is going to be his new companion, and it's about why that doesn't work out and why he comes back for Rose.
And there's a nice little writing trick you play with that companion as well, who confounds expectations a little as we go through.
Well, I wanted to do a couple of things in there that you can only do in a book that you can't do on screen.
Yeah, excellent. I actually have a small bone to pick with Rose Tyler. This is something that can only have happened in Doctor Who. Charlie was saying, it's hard to remember now, but when Doctor Who was coming back, there was huge amounts of uncertainty and lots of people weren't prepared to jump on board. There was very little in the way of merchandise, for example. Licensors weren't prepared to sort of like go charging into it. And about the first bits of merchandise that came out were these 3 novels, of which I wrote one. And what's quite telling about the first series is that the Doctor and Rose don't actually go to an alien planet at all in that first series, because they were too scared of people saying, they're in a quarry, and that would have been it. It would have like blown the illusion. So when I was writing this book, Russell T. Davies actually said to me, would I my book, the first time Rose visits an alien planet, which I was very grateful to do, and I sent her to a planet called Justicia. And then Russell wrote in that planet name to an episode later in the series. And Rose screamed off, it's all very well going to Justicia and somewhere else. And I thought, hang on, I've been corrected on the pronunciation of my own alien planet by a fictional character. That can only happen in Doctor Who. It's one of the reasons I love it so much, I guess. Okay, so that's interesting. So there's so much we can talk about. We just talked about Doctor Who, but of course we do have the authors here of young James Bond and young Sherlock Holmes as well. I'd like to touch on them briefly, if I may, as well. So Andy, clearly you were huge on Sherlock as a child. The first chance you got to write for Doctor Who, you wrote Sherlock in as well. How did it turn out that you ended up writing a very successful series of young Sherlocks?
It's really just a fluke and sheer luck. My agent, who's been with me for 25 years, ever since I was doing the original Doctor Who novels. I mean, in those days, he couldn't change the contracts because the Virgin contracts were absolutely fixed. And he said, well, there's no point in taking any money from me. Just keep me on board, keep talking, and at some stage you'll make it big, and then I'll start taking money, which was nice of him. But he phoned me up 5 or 6 years ago, and he also represents the Conan Doyle literary estate. And he said, I've been having dinner with the Conan Doyle family, 'cause there's 3 grandnephews left. And he said, I was having dinner with them, and I pointed out to them they control the most popular fictional character in the entire world. And I also pointed out that young adult fiction is the really big area, the growth area in fiction at the moment. So surely we can combine the two. And they said, let's give it a go. So he phoned me up and said, Andy, I know you're a Sherlock Holmes fan. Do you want to do a young Sherlock Holmes novel? So I just jumped at the chance. I thought it's what I've been aiming for years and years. And I wrote 3 chapters in a proposal. I've been talking around a couple of publishers. But my publishers are here, so I don't go into too much detail. We did take it to another publisher first. And we explained something about, Sherlock Holmes aged 14, it's about how the character grows up into the later Sherlock Holmes. And the editor we talked to was sitting there and said, yep, I understand completely, I know exactly where you're coming from. Where's Watson? I said, no, you don't understand. He's not met Watson yet. That happened when he's in his 20s. And the guy said, okay, that's fine, I understand that. Where's Moriarty? No, again, you don't quite understand where we're coming from. He hasn't met Moriarty yet. So we were in the wrong publishers. And then we went to Macmillan second, and they've been absolutely brilliant. They got right on board, and they understood exactly what we wanted to do.
Excellent. Marcus, has there ever been a character you've looked at and thought it might be quite fun to, or wondered about their past, or putting on the spot a little bit?
Yeah, no.
Never thought young Poirot?
I think
Miss Marple?
I think, to be honest, I've not yet reached the point where there aren't ideas of my own, like, filling up my notebook that I want to work on. It was great fun to do this work of, writing a character. In some ways, it's easy because so much of the groundwork is laid out for you, and in other ways, it's harder because so much of the groundwork is laid out for you. I enjoyed the experience, but
you're keen to repeat it.
I would do it again if it was the right character, yeah. But as to who that is, I would have to think.
Would you come back to Doctor Who again?
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
Different Doctor this time, maybe?
I don't know. I think I might stick with, unless I got to write about Tom Baker, perhaps. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. And Charlie, tell us quickly before we go to questions how you came to Young Bond. What was the route you took?
It wasn't my idea at all. Marcus has made me feel really stupid and unimaginative now. I can't think up ideas of my own. But maybe he's right. No, it was the Ian Fleming estate. They had seen the success of things like Alex Rider, and they thought, we've got the actual James Bond, we should get someone to write some teenage James Bond books. There was a fantastic woman called Kate Jones who was working for them, who had been my editor when I was writing adult crime books in the early 90s, and she put me forward, and amazingly I got the job. It was a dream job, and I was, at my late stage of life, I became a children's author, which was brilliant. But there's a lot of similarity between Doctor Who and James Bond. They're both characters that have been kept alive by regenerating. The Doctor Who, specifically, it's the same person, but they regenerate to another actor. In James Bond, you get a new film and it's a different actor and nobody really questions it. And both of them, they have a sort of kit of parts that, as long as you've got those elements in place, you can update them and you can change the central actor and the central character in a way. So, with James Bond, you have to have Bond, he has to have, his pistol, his tuxedo, a Bond villain, a Bond girl, fast cars, beautiful exotic locations, M, Q, Moneypenny. As long as you've got all that in there, you can do almost what you want with it. And with Doctor Who, it's the same. You've got Doctor Who, he has his sonic screwdriver, he has the TARDIS, he has the companion, he travels through space and time. He's got his one outfit that he wears in all the episodes. So as long as you've got those elements in place, you can keep changing it and updating it and making it relevant to the times. And I quite like coming to a project where you've got that structure, where you've got that kit. And certainly with James Bond, you even have a sort of structure to how the novels work. All the best Ian Fleming novels and all the best films follow roughly the same structure. And I like that. I like having that, and I can then hang on to that anything that I want.
Operate within the structure, but it's good. Patrick?
Young characters?
Yeah.
I don't know. young Edward Heath.
Now, that would be something, wouldn't it?
There's probably, I think there's probably, I wonder if she would go for this. There's totally a market for a young Dolly Parton. Isn't there? Yeah. My idea, copyright, trademark. Who knows? I like, this is brought to me, and I thought, it's a great unexpected challenge. It's to take something that other people love and know and try to respect that and make it my own. And it's a great creative challenge.
And would you maybe come back for a novella or something else?
I haven't offered a Doctor Who novel, but the pay really is shit. I mean, it really is. Wow.
It's a labour of love.
Okay. I don't know. I never say never.
Okay, and Mary, I was going to say to you, colossally busy, and yet you made time for Doctor Who, so...
Yeah, well, you know what I'd love to do, what's on my bucket list, is to actually write an episode for the TV programme. That's what I want to do.
Well, we saw Sweet Papa in
Just
there.
putting that out there, I definitely want, that's what I want to know. I want to write a TV episode, at least one, before I kick the bucket. So.
And I would like to see a female Doctor. I think it's time that we have...
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
I think it's...
Or a female black Doctor, that would be more fantastic.
Certainly in terms of reinterpreting the role, I think that'd be a pretty cool thing to do. Now, we've just got time for a few questions, I think.
I just wondered what it's like when you're writing something like this and regenerating your character, what it's like dealing with all of us, the crazy fans and all of their expectations.
The fans and their expectations. I think Patrick has something to say here.
Yeah, if you go on Goodreads, my Doctor Who story is the least popular thing I've ever done. And I don't care, I don't mind, but it's mainly people saying, not enough Doctor 1 star. And so, I kind of don't care. I mean, I thought, I know that I'm going to, treat this respectfully. I know that I'm going to do my best to tell the best story. I'm really, really proud of my story.
Can I just chip in and ask, you actually read your reviews on Goodreads? Why the fuck do you do that?
I read them sort of like in the first week because I want to get a gauge of whether people like it or not.
That way mountains rise, Patrick. Stop it. Stop it.
I'm good with this, but I don't know. I feel like if I did a good enough job, if I really, really love, if I feel like it's something that I'm proud of and that I would put in the rest of my canon, if you know what I mean. If I'm not going to dismiss it as though I just did a Doctor Who story, so I don't have to try. Then I'm okay, and I'm happy to hear. Blowback. I know Russell T Davies. I sent it to him. He said, "I love it. I wish I was still making the program so you could write for it." I thought, well, that sucks. But yeah. So you do your best, but you're never going to please everybody. So you might as well just give that up.
That's very true. And those Doctor-like stories are some of the most popular ones. Blink had very little Doctor in, and look how incredible Blink is one of my all-time favourites.
Thank you.
Everyone else got very quickly. There's another question coming. Let's go for that.
If the Doctor could say bye to Rose in the last episode of The Last Doctor, why didn't he go get her?
Why did he
Go get her.
Why did he go get her? If he could say goodbye to her at the last episode. I thought he had to burn up a son. I see when she came over in the he left the other one, didn't he? Yeah, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. Got any thoughts on that? No, I don't think we have. But maybe you will be the writer who comes up with the answer to that question. That's very good.
I just wanted to ask, between you there's one Sherlock Holmes author, two James Bond authors, and all of you have written for Doctor Who. I just wanted to know if you had any ideas for what the collective noun would be of that.
Very good question.
A squandering.
I'll think about that one.
I think it's known as a rehash.
A royalty check.
It's either a geekdom or maybe a professionalism of authors.
A very nice gang, I think, is the collective now. Lovely. Very smart people. Yeah, we're lovely. Another question there.
I'm just wondering what you think about how Doctor Who should in future tackle minority groups. How Doctor Who should in future tackle minority groups, because obviously the Doctor's always been a straight white man who's able-bodied. Is there room to represent minorities?
There's massive room, isn't there, really? I
think that's a very good point, and of course there is, but my personal view is you don't do it by setting out to do it. You do it because it happens naturally, because people want to write it that way. As soon as you start doing it as an issue, it's clunky, it's heavy, people won't buy it, it'll just look really clumsy. And we just have to hope there are people who want to write in a broader sense, and I think all of us on this panel write in a very broad sense, but people have a different attitude of how to achieve that.
Yeah, but nobody's going to have the opportunity to do it unless they're hired for the show. The reason, I mean, well, come clean here, the reason Mallory's on the panel was because I declined to do the panel if it was just going to be 5 white guys. Because I thought the world's different now. And I know Mallory has some opinions.
I always. Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, the fact that, for example, on the TV programme, a woman hasn't written an episode since 2008, I mean, come on. So I just think it needs to be more diverse in who writes it, not just who's in the cast. And although it's really important to have diversity within that cast, I think it's important to have diversity behind the camera and writing the episodes as well. And that goes for women writing it, and that goes for ethnic minorities writing it. So that's why I wanted to join the panel and have my say. And can I one last question?
Hello, nice to see you all. When I first started writing, I don't think I quite realised the importance of story. I seemed to think writing was mainly people getting together and speaking in a room. So I was just wondering what for you, maybe you realised the importance of story, or what made you love story? Was it a particular book or film, or even the writings of Joseph Campbell, or The Hero's Journey, that type of thing?
I think partly it probably comes from an instinct you have for trying to tell stories. I mean, you can work out why you enjoyed something, I guess, and you sort of do that subconsciously, which is why you look for other stories within a genre or want to explore different genres. But I think probably at the end of the day, although yes, there are certain formulae you can look to, it's about what story you want to tell, what characters you need to assemble in order to tell it in the best, most exciting way, you know, and where does that take you? And that's certainly my view, but
I would actually go in the opposite direction. I think we're bombarded with story. In every film we watch, most of the books we read, most of the television series, they're all story. And the best piece of advice I was ever given was by my English teacher at school. I guess I was about 13, 14, and I'd written a James Bond, Leslie Charteris Saint parody with lots of story and nothing else. Things happened. And my English teacher read it, and she handed it back to me and she said, this is all very well, but why are the characters doing these things? And it's like a little light bulb went on in my head, and I thought, character. Why are the characters doing this? That's what I need to get into. So, no, for me, story is kind of easy because it's all around us. Character is the important thing.
I think we might have to stop and before we die of heat exhaustion. But thank you very much for coming, and please give a massive round of applause for our fabulous panel: Mallory Blackman, Michael Ness, Charlie Hickson, Marcus Sedgwick, Andrew Lane, and me, Steve Cole. Thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you. Yeah, I think some of us are signing things and doing stuff. So.